North LA releases tomorrow. You'll notice the little clock that I have on my screen today is 2/2 of 22, which by itself is really cool. But we have the release of North LA beginning tomorrow, and that is really awesome because along with the release comes the speculation of all of those new zones. What does each new zone bring to the table, and what ones am I looking for that I think have a shot at being in a collection? What zones am I going to be focusing on in North LA? And really, the thing to keep in mind here is that North LA is massive, so there's going to be a lot of ground to cover here too, just like Southern LA. Hey there, John Henry here, SSFTG. Welcome to the video. If this is your first time watching one of our videos, why not drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel too so you don't miss any of our content coming out every single day. North LA is going to have a ton of zones. Around 37, I believe, is how many I counted. 37 different neighborhoods or somewhere in that vicinity. And that comes with some big names in there. Each area in the northern portion of LA has something cool, of course, but there are going to be some that I'm going to have a bit more focus on that I think could become a solid investment from a potential collection and rarity perspective, as well as just the perspective that I believe will, at the very least, hold value nicely. Taking a look at some of the stats from the South LA release, that was one of their most successful to date, and we saw that in the weekend review where it was actually the highest point that it's been in terms of UPX transaction values and all that. 121,000 properties minted on launch day. And now after that release, we're going into the northern portion of LA, which is going to be coming out again tomorrow, February the 3rd at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time or 11 o'clock Eastern. North LA is one of a pretty big zone of interest. There's some big chonky places in there too. But if we look at the actual release schedule, if you need more info on it, this is all on how to get there and all of that. You can pause the screen or head over to Upland's website for all of the news and info there. The part that we're going to be looking at, though, is the release schedule. 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, and I'm just going to say everything going forward in Eastern Time, just so that we're on the same page. 11 o'clock Eastern, Phase 1 begins in North Los Angeles, and they're going to be starting things off with Mission Hills, that neighborhood in the northern part of LA. Looking back over at the map, if you're not familiar where Mission Hills is, it's this guy right here. If you zoom out a little bit further, and if you zoom in a little bit closer, you'll be able to see the name, but it's right next to San Fernando, Mission Hills inside of that. That one, in and of itself, is going to be a relatively interesting one. That's an interesting play right out of the gates with Mission Hills. I'm personally going to be rolling in there with the idea of trying to grab at least 3 properties to hold for a possible collection, because I do believe that Mission Hills has the possibility of being a collection, considering that they have things like Andres Pico Adobe, I believe that's the second oldest Adobe around. They also have Mission San Fernando Rey de España. There's a lot of things that are going on in Mission Hills that are very, very interesting, and its proximity to San Fernando, which is technically a different location and is not launching as part of North LA, may open the door to an easy way in if it does launch in future. Then we go in, after a little bit of a pause for about 5 minutes or so, to the Shadow Hills and Valley Village Open. That's going to be the next portion, Phase 2 of the stress test. Both of those are interesting locations as well. For me, I find Valley Village to be a little bit more interesting. But just so that we know where we're looking at here, let me zoom back out again. You can see it right there. Shadow Hills is this guy right there. And then Valley Village is right there. So those are going to be the 2 locations that open up next. Like I said, both of them have some perks, but I honestly, I think Valley Village is going to be a bit more of an interesting play. One of the big reasons I like Valley Village in and of itself, first off, you've got Chandler Boulevard, which is cutting through it. You've got a couple other big boulevards, which are cutting through. But more importantly, for the rest of the Northern LA launch, it's right next to Studio City. So realistically, if we can find something on the southern border here, we could very nicely drift into Studio City without having to utilize any sends at all. And there are a lot of hit lists for me in Studio City that I'm interested in. My end goal going into Shadow Hills over Valley Village, Valley Village over Shadow Hills, although I will try to visit both. Valley Village, I'm still going to be looking to end goal by the southern portion to work my way into Studio City without having to use any sends, but I also want to work on, another one where I can hold 3 properties for a possible collection. The next portion and the remainder of the LA launch comes after that with another 5-minute warning before the release of Northern LA, and that's going to be the rest of Northern LA. Now, assuming platform stability and all that fun stuff, then we'll be going into the rest of Northern LA, and that's when things start getting really fun because there are a ton of different places. I have a few that are on my hit list and a few things of interest. Obviously, Studio City, like we had just talked about, Studio City is going to be a big one. They've got Universal Studios. I mean, come on, right? How much more obvious can it get other than Universal Studios? But there are a lot of other things that are going on in there. We've got, if we zoom in a little bit closer here, and we go in towards this area. How much of Universal Studios that we're actually going to be able to mint, if anything, is a big question. If we're not able to mint anything in Universal Studios, if there's just nothing there, then I would like to try to see if I can get close to it at least. Somewhere on the border, a cool looking property around that area in the Studio City portion. But again, the goal is going to be around 3 properties or so holding for a possible collection. A little bit further north in North Hollywood. North Hollywood is another one that has a lot of things of interest going on for it. North Hollywood has things like the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. They've got the Pierce Brothers Valhalla Memorial Park. How cool is that? The portal to the Folded Wing Shrine to Aviation. That one isn't necessarily in North Hollywood yet. It's just on the upper portion here. You can't quite get to it. But if they do launch that next portion, that'll be up there too. There's also some interesting things with North Hollywood, like the Universal Studios border. Just being on the border to Universal Studios or the Studio City area here too is something of a consideration if you're trying to work your way in towards that portion. Of course, going west a little bit to Encino, it's hard to ignore Encino, and one thing that should be very obvious, cutting right through the middle of it, is this giant blue highway here, freeway. If we zoom in a little bit, you'll see what that is. That's Ventura Boulevard, and that's one that I do believe has the potential of becoming a possible collection. It is a big boulevard, so if anything, it's going to be on the lower tier side of things. It may even be one that requires up to 5 properties because of its length. But I do think that Ventura Boulevard has a shot, and it's right through the heart of Encino. What better spot? If we're looking across that same mentality going around Ventura Boulevard, we've got things like Los Encinos State Historic Park. There's Encino Park. There's a lot of names across this boulevard, and usually, not always, but usually when there's a lot of names down a road like that, it gives you an idea that it's going to be a possible collection. We don't know what the collections will be until they get released, but there's a very good shot, and I'm looking at Ventura Boulevard for sure. It does cut through a couple different places. I like it through Encino, but it depends on where you want to pick it up, if that's going to be one on your hit list. Going on along with that and taking a little bit of a stroll out to the West Hills over here, the West Hills, obviously, right out of the gates, we can see that this is going to be more of a residential area. But in the West Hills, there's a couple really interesting spots, like the Orcutt Ranch. That's at the end of Roscoe Boulevard, if you're looking to hunt for it. I'm not going to give the exact address. I got to have you guys work a little bit. But in the West Hills, Orcutt Ranch is going to be a really interesting one. Shadow Ranch, which is in the bottom southeast corner, that's another interesting one. I'll let you guys find it from there. But the West Hills has some ranches and things that could be very interesting plays. Maybe not necessarily from a collection, although ranches could end up being a collection, but just in terms of valuation, I believe those are some things that will hold value relatively well. Right to the east of West Hills, we've got Canoga Park, and Canoga Park isn't really a huge one, but there is one building in particular of interest. And that's going to be this bad mamma jamma. In Canoga Park, they have the Platt building, and one that I am incredibly interested in. What a fun building this would be, assuming it doesn't go to auction or something, to add to the portfolio. Looking a little bit further north up into Granada Hills, there's not a ton going on in Granada Hills, but there is one that really stands out that could be very interesting as far as the overall movement is concerned. White Oak Avenue, which is this jumbotron north-south road cutting through on the western portion. If you go in, and let me zoom out a little bit because I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, right here. This guy right there. If we zoom in a little bit more on this, there's a couple things that stand out. First off, there's a lot of parks and a lot of green around these areas, and we also have a lot of cool names that I'm interested in. But along with that, we've got just this road in general with all of this activity going on and splitting through so many different zones could potentially at least bring a value play. I'm not necessarily so sure that we're looking at White Oak Ave as a collection. It's a possibility. If it does end up being a collection, it's likely going to be a lower end one. But White Oak Ave does have my interest in terms of a larger play, just from a street perspective. For those of you who are big fans of Juicy Couture, not really on my hit list, but it's there, Arleta in the middle here. Arleta is where the HQ for Juicy Couture is. So if that's up your alley, maybe that's something that you might want to possibly focus in on. I'll let you do some homework in terms of where that is, but this could become a nice little interesting spot. These little zones do tend to become value holes that tend to increase quite nicely, or at the very least maintain. Of course, we can't forget about Northridge, which has California State University. Within Northridge, with California State University in any college town area, there's going to be a lot of other things that come along with it. We've got a lot of businesses, a lot of buildings, a lot of smaller potential areas, but this is going to be a much more populated area that could come at a bit more of a cost, and I'm hoping that's not the case, but this is one that I'm going to be focusing on as well around the California State University, because that could be a zone of interest in and of itself, let alone, looking at collections. And then another one, and my last one that I really want to look at, is going to be in Van Nuys. Van Nuys, and specifically Van Nuys Boulevard, is going to be one that is of some interest. Now, Van Nuys Boulevard is another one that I do believe has a shot at becoming a collection. There's not a ton of names up and down it, but it is a relatively long one, and it is a big name in terms of the locale. So from a perspective of possible collection, Van Nuys on Van Nuys Boulevard definitely has my interest, but just Van Nuys in general, it's just a cool zone. There's a lot of really neat things in Van Nuys, and I like the name, gonna be totally honest, which of course brings me to the other one that we've been kind of joking about here and there with Tujunga. This one I think is going to be on my list just out of curiosity's sake. Those are the major areas that I'm going to be watching for the launch of Northern LA. Which ones have you tipped in terms of interest? There's a lot of different locations, just like we saw with Southern LA. I'm only one person, right? You are only one person. We're only going to be able to make it to so many locations before we just get spread too thin and we end up getting nothing. So which ones are on your hit list? Which ones are you trying to get in your bags? Now, remember, if you aren't a part of Upland yet, you're not able to get any of them, and that's a bummer. So this is an amazing time to do it, especially ahead of the Northern LA launch tomorrow. When you register with the referral link, you get the starter UpX to get going, but you also gain that huge 50% bonus on your first UpX purchase with a reward cap of 50,000 UpX. It's hard to argue with a 50% more bonus just for using a link. What areas are you looking for? Were there any that maybe I missed, or maybe some that you think are going to be a huge collection that I didn't even consider? I always love hearing from you all, so drop them in the comments below. I wish you the best of luck as we move into the next phase of Los Angeles. I know there was a little bit of frustration here and there on the last one, but these are always learning opportunities, and like I said, fingers crossed they learn from this last one, and this next one just gets better and better. Los Angeles is going to be a huge one, both north, south, and Inglewood, and all together, so, it's going to be a big one. I wish you the best of luck, and may the minting gods favor your mouse hand. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all in the next.